The first time Nathan met a man worth $12 million, he did not recognize him. He was standing in the office car park at 7:40 in the morning, leaning against a gray pickup truck that was clearly older than Nathan's career. Faded paint, a dent in the tailgate nobody had bothered to fix. Nathan assumed he was a contractor. 2 hours later, that man walked into the boardroom and everybody stood up. And Nathan, 29 years old, earning $140,000 a year, sitting in a leased German sedan he could barely cover, wearing a watch he was still paying for, realized something that took him another 3 years to fully understand. He had been buying the appearance of the thing. The man in the car park had been buying the thing. Let's talk about what wealthy people actually do with money, and more usefully, the specific things they almost never do. His name was Ellis. He was 61. He had built and sold 2 industrial supply businesses, and his net worth sat somewhere around $12 million. He drove a 12-year-old pickup with 210,000 miles on it. Nathan, who was worth about $11,000 once you subtracted what he owed, drove a leased sedan that cost him $940 a month. Read those 2 sentences again. That is not a morale. That is just the arithmetic of who was actually rich. This pattern is not anecdotal. Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent 2 decades studying American millionaires for their book, The Millionaire Next Door, and the findings genuinely surprised people. Most millionaires in their research had never spent more than about $400 on a suit. The most common vehicles they owned were ordinary domestic and Japanese models, not luxury brands. A large share had never bought a new car at all. Stanley and Danko also gave us a formula, and it is worth pausing on because it is brutally simple. Take your age, multiply it by your annual pre-tax income, divide by 10. That is roughly where your net worth should be if you are doing well. Nathan was 29, earning $140,000. 29 times $140,000 divided by 10 is $406,000. He had 11. He was not poor. He was a high earner with the balance sheet of a student, which is an extremely common and extremely well-disguised condition. And Ellis was not some rare eccentric. The pattern runs all the way up. Warren Buffett still lives in the house in Omaha he bought in 1958 for $31,500. Sam Walton, who built the largest retailer on earth, drove a pickup truck around Bentonville until he died. And when asked about it, reportedly said something like, "What am I supposed to haul my dogs around in? A Rolls Royce?" Ingvar Kamprad, who founded IKEA, flew economy and drove an old Volvo for 2 decades. You can dismiss any one of those as a quirk. You cannot dismiss the pattern, and the pattern is the point. At the very top, the correlation between wealth and visible spending does not just weaken, it inverts. And here is the part that stung. Everybody who saw Nathan assumed he was doing better than Ellis. That assumption was the product he had been buying all along. In 1899, an economist named Thorstein Veblen published The Theory of the Leisure Class and gave us a phrase we have never stopped needing: conspicuous consumption. His argument was that beyond a certain point, people do not buy goods for what the goods do. They buy them to signal status to other people. The usefulness of the object becomes almost incidental. What matters is that it can be seen. That was written before cars, before credit cards, before anyone had ever posted a photograph of a meal. Now watch what that means in practice. A watch tells the time. Every phone tells the time more accurately and for free. So when someone spends $4,000 on a watch, they are not buying time telling. They are buying a signal, and the signal only works if somebody else sees it and correctly reads it, which means the purchase has a hidden requirement. It needs an audience. This is the single most useful test I can give you, and we will come back to it. Ask of any purchase, would I still want this if nobody would ever know I had it? Some things pass easily. A good mattress, a quiet house, a reliable car, nobody sees your mattress. Other things collapse instantly the moment you ask. Nathan ran the test on his own sedan years later and found something uncomfortable. He did not enjoy driving it. He enjoyed arriving in it. Those are not the same purchase, and only one of them keeps working after the novelty fades. Ellis, meanwhile, was buying things with no audience requirement at all. That is why his life looked so unremarkable from the outside. Not because he was depriving himself, because almost nothing he bought was aimed at anybody else. There is a second mechanism, and it is sneakier than status because it does not feel like status at all. It feels like taste. In 1769, the French philosopher Denis Diderot wrote a short essay called Regrets on Parting with My Old Dressing Gown. He had been given a beautiful new scarlet robe, and the robe was so elegant that everything around it suddenly looked shabby by comparison. So he replaced his old straw chair with a leather one. Then the desk, then the prints on the walls, then the bookshelves. Within a year, he had redecorated his entire study and put himself into debt, and he wrote that he had been the master of his old robe, but had become the slave of the new one. The anthropologist Grant McCracken later named this the Diderot effect. One acquisition that does not fit your existing set of things creates pressure to upgrade everything else until the set matches again. Nathan's version took 18 months and he never once noticed it happening. The car came first. Then the car made his old apartment building's car park look wrong, so he moved somewhere with covered parking, which cost $400 more a month. The new apartment had bare walls and a better view, so there was furniture. The furniture made his old television look small. The new address came with new neighbors, and new neighbors came with a different standard of what you wear on a Saturday. Not one of those decisions felt like a status purchase. Every single one felt like correcting an inconsistency. That is a trap. The first purchase is a choice. Everything after it feels like maintenance. And here is what the wealthy do differently. And it is almost boringly simple. They keep the set consistent at a lower level. Ellis's truck did not create pressure to upgrade anything because nothing in his life was pretending to be anything. A modest set is stable. An upgraded set demands to be completed. Now let's do the arithmetic, because this is where the abstract becomes uncomfortable. Take one decision, not a lifetime of decision. One, the car. A nicer car at $60,000 versus a perfectly good one at $25,000. The difference is $35,000. Most people stop there and think, $35,000, that is the cost. It is not. That is a sticker. The cost is what those $35,000 would have become. Invested at an 8% long-run average, $35,000 over 30 years grows to about $352,000. One car, $350,000. But nobody buys one car. Cars get replaced, so run it properly. The same upgrade decision made every 5 years for 30 years. 6 cars, each $35,000 gap invested from the moment it was spent. The first grows for 30 years, the second for 25, the third for 20, and so on. Add them together and the total is $993,000. Just under $1 million from one repeated preference. Now, put it in the units this channel likes because that is where it gets personal. The average American drives around 13,500 miles a year. At a realistic average speed of about 30 miles an hour, that is roughly 450 hours a year behind the wheel. 13,500 hours over 30 years. $993,000 divided by 13,500 hours is about $74. Every single hour Nathan spent sitting in the nicer car cost him about $74 of future wealth. Stuck in traffic, waiting at lights, circling for parking. $74 an hour to sit in a slightly better seat. Let me be straight about the assumptions because you should never accept a number like that without them. I used 8%, which is below the long-run historical average of US stocks. I ignored insurance, financing interest, and higher maintenance on the more expensive car, all of which make the gap worse, not better. And I assume the cheaper car actually works, because a car that strands you is not a saving. Under those assumptions, one preference, held quietly for 30 years, is worth about $1 million. That is not a lecture about coffee. That is one decision made 6 times. Now, the part that gets left out of every video like this, which turns it into a lie by omission. Wealthy people are not simply spending less. On several categories, they spend dramatically more. It is just that you cannot see any of it. Elizabeth Curd Halkett, a professor at the University of Southern California, wrote a book called The Sum of Small Things about exactly this. She documented a shift among high earners away from visible luxury goods and toward what she calls inconspicuous consumption. The categories are consistent: education, healthcare, childcare, retirement contributions, insurance, and professional services. Her analysis of U.S. spending data found that top earners devote a substantially larger share of their spending to education than everyone else, while spending proportionally less on visible material goods. None of that shows up in a car park. And notice what every single one of those categories has in common: education, health, insurance, retirement, professional help, they all pay out later. Every one of them is a transfer from your present self to your future self, or to your children's future selves. Visible luxury does the opposite. It pays out immediately, in the moment somebody notices, and then it is finished. The object remains, but the return on it was collected in the first week. So the real divide is not expensive versus cheap. It is whether the purchase pays you now, once, or keeps paying you for 20 years. There is a second category, and the research on it is very clear. In 2011, Elizabeth Dunn, Daniel Gilbert, and Timothy Wilson published a paper in the Journal of Consumer Psychology with the wonderfully blunt title, "If money doesn't make you happy, then you probably aren't spending it right." Their principles included buying experiences rather than things, buying many small pleasures rather than a few large ones, and paying now to consume later rather than the reverse. And the strongest one, buying time. Ellis paid a cleaner. He paid an accountant. He paid someone to maintain his equipment, and he flew rather than drove on long journeys even though the truck would have been cheaper. Nathan mowed his own lawn on Saturdays while making $140,000 a year and thought of that as being sensible with money. One of them was buying the thing that cannot be manufactured. The other was defending a number. So the honest summary is not the rich are frugal. It is this: they spend heavily on things that compound: health, skills, time, their children's options, and they refuse to spend on things that only depreciate or only signal. Now I have to complicate this because otherwise this video is just another one telling people that their problems are their own fault. The novelist Terry Pratchett wrote a passage that economists have been quoting ever since, usually called the boots theory. A wealthy man buys a pair of $50 boots that last 10 years. A poor man can only afford $10 boots, which last a season, so he buys new ones every year. After 10 years, the poor man has spent $100 and still has wet feet, and the rich man has spent $50 and is dry. That is not a story about discipline. It is a story about access, and it is measurable. Researchers call it the poverty premium, the consistent finding that lower income households pay more for the same things. Higher interest rates on credit, higher insurance premiums, prepayment meters that charge more per unit of energy, bank fees that only trigger on low balances, smaller package sizes at higher unit cost because the bulk option requires cash you do not have today. Being short of money is expensive. That is not a metaphor, so understand what "the rich never spend money like this" actually means. It does not mean rich people are wiser. Quite often, it means they can afford the option that is cheaper over time. And buying quality once is a privilege before it is a virtue, which is precisely why the parts of this that are free matter so much. You may not be able to buy the $50 boots yet. You can decline the audience requirement. You can refuse the Diderot spiral. You can avoid financing something that loses value while you are still paying for it. Those cost nothing, and they are most of the gap. So let's get specific. Over those 3 years, Nathan reverse engineered what Ellis was doing, and it came down to 3 questions asked before buying anything meaningful. The first, does this need an audience? We covered it, but here it is as a hard test. If nobody would ever know you owned it, would you still buy it? If the answer is no, you are not buying an object. You are renting other people's attention, and the rent is due again next season because attention resets. The second, what does it cost per use? Not what it costs. What it costs each time you actually use it. A $400 coat worn 300 times is $1.30 a wear. A $150 coat worn 8 times is nearly $19 a wear. The cheap coat is over 14 times more expensive in the only unit that matters. This is the question that stops wealthy people buying rubbish, and it is also the question that tells you when spending more is genuinely correct. Sometimes it is. The rich are not avoiding expensive things. They are avoiding low-use things. The third, and the one Nathan found hardest, does it need feeding? Every purchase has a sticker price and an appetite. The boat needs a mooring, insurance, fuel, winter storage, and a service. The larger house needs heating, furnishing, cleaning, and taxes forever. The performance car needs premium fuel, specialist tires, and a mechanic who charges double. Wealthy people are unusually alert to appetite because they have usually owned something that ate more than they expected. The purchase is a single event. The appetite is a subscription you did not consciously sign up to. Sticker price is what you pay once. Appetite is what you pay forever. So here is the short list. Not habits to admire, mistakes to avoid. They almost never finance a depreciating asset. Borrowing to buy something that is losing value while you pay interest on it is the single most efficient, wealth-destroying transaction available to an ordinary person. A new car typically loses a fifth of its value in the first year and roughly half within 5. You are paying interest on an asset that is actively shrinking underneath you. The wealthy borrow, often heavily, but overwhelmingly against things that produce income or appreciate. They almost never upgrade on a schedule, replacing a phone, a car, or a wardrobe because a period of time has passed rather than because the thing stopped working is a habit that looks like normal life and functions like a standing order out of your future. Ellis replaced things when they broke. That is the entire policy. They'll almost never buy to close a gap they feel about themselves. This is the quiet one. Tim Kasser and Richard Ryan spent years documenting the relationship between strongly materialistic values and lower well-being. And the direction of the finding is consistent. People who organize their lives around acquiring things report worse outcomes on measures of well-being, not better ones. A purchase made to fix a feeling has a very short half-life because the feeling was never about the object. So the object gets returned to the shelf and a new one gets nominated. And the cycle bills you monthly. They almost never mistake cash flow for wealth. This is the one that catches high earners specifically. And it caught Nathan for years. A large salary arriving every month feels like wealth. It is not. It is a stream and streams stop with a restructure, an illness, an industry that moves. Wealth is what remains when the stream stops. Ellis's 12 million was a reservoir. Nathan's 140,000 was a pipe. And he had quietly arranged his life so that every dollar coming through it already had somewhere to be before it arrived. A pipe that is fully committed is not wealth. It is a very comfortable form of dependence and it evaporates the month the pipe closes. And the last one, which is really the first three combined. They almost never let their spending be decided by people whose opinion they will not care about in 5 years. Nathan could name precisely the 11 people the sedan had been for. He no longer speaks to 7 of them. Right, practical, specific, and framed as rules rather than vibes. 1. Put a delay between wanting and buying and make it fixed. Anything above a threshold you set, say $500, waits 30 days. Write it on a list with the date. Most wants do not survive 30 days, and the ones that do are usually the ones worth having. You are not banning anything. You are removing the purchase from the moment that created it, which is where almost all the damage happens. 2. Price everything per use before you price it in total. Do the division out loud. Cost divided by realistic number of uses and be honest about realistic. This single habit will make you spend more on some things and far less on others, which is exactly right. Cheap things you barely use are not savings. 3. Never finance anything that depreciates. If you cannot buy the car in cash, the honest answer is that it is not the car you can afford yet. This one rule, held for a working lifetime, is worth more than every other tip in this video combined. 4. When your income rises, hold the set still. The Diderot spiral starts when one item stops matching. So on a pay rise, deliberately do not upgrade the visible things. The car, the address, the watch. Upgrade the invisible ones instead. The pension contribution, the emergency fund, the health check you have been putting off. Nobody will see it, and that is the point. 5. Buy time before you buy objects. Given the research, this is the highest return spending category available to you. Paying to remove a task you genuinely dread is consistently better value than an equivalent amount spent on a thing. Most people, including wealthy people, still refuse to do it, which means it is quietly available to you. 6. Run the audience test every time out loud. Would I still want this if nobody would ever know? 6 words. It costs nothing, takes 2 seconds, and it will save you more money over a lifetime than any investment strategy you are likely to pick. Nathan is 34 now. He drives a 6-year-old car he owns outright. He still earns well. His net worth crossed $300,000 last year, which is not remarkable, except that 4 years ago it was $11,000 and falling. The change was not income. His income barely moved. The change was that he stopped buying the appearance of the thing. Ellis died in the spring. Nathan went to the funeral and was surprised at how many people were there, and at how many of them told the same kind of story. A business loan quietly guaranteed. A nephew's tuition handled. A bad year covered without anyone being told. $12 million, and almost none of it had ever been visible. That was not an accident. That was the entire strategy. So here is the thing I want you to take from this. And it is not about being frugal, because frugal is not the point and never was. Everything you buy is either working for you or being displayed for somebody else. That is the whole distinction. It is not price, it is not brand, it is not even need, it is direction. Does this point back at your life, or does it point outward at an audience? The wealthy figured out early that the audience is not paying attention, does not remember, and would not care if it did. So the only question that actually matters here is this one. What is the most expensive thing you currently own that you bought for somebody else's eyes? Be specific. Name it in the comments. And tell me honestly whether you would buy it again if nobody would ever see it, because that answer is worth more than the object.